Lipinski.
And I'm Keith DeCandido. Welcome to another wonderful episode of the Chronic Grifter, as we like to call it, the next best thing to Mom's home cooking.
This week we're taking a look at one of the women mentioned during our past discussion on women and fantasy and science fiction, Ursula K. Guin.
First, we'd like to thank our guests from last week's discussion of Beauty and the Beast, Wendy Peeney, Stephanie Wiltsey, and Angela Fernan.
Stephanie and Angela are putting together a video version of the Beauty and the Beast newsletter Pipeline, and here's a sneak peek at it.
It is true. You work with your females, harm them, and force them to wear clothing.
For more information on Pipeline, you can write to Starving Artists Workshop, 186 Western Avenue, Albany, New York, 12203-1227. Our book note this week is The Wizardry Cursed by Rick Cook. When Silicon Valley hackers discover a new world where technology and wizardry coexist, it could mean the end of both worlds' existence. Published by Baen Books, it costs $4.95. And now here, with the latest in video releases, is our friend, the Man in Black.
Afternoon. Welcome to another edition of the Video Report. Coming to video stores the 11th of April is a tape of two of Steven Spielberg's Amazing Stories episodes. The Mission, starring Kevin Costner and Kiefer Sutherland, and The Wedding Ring, starring Danny DeVito and his wife, Rhea Perlman. Although very welcome, this tape is a bit pricey at $79.95. New video price-itis lives. Satan also has one son. This is the promo for Warlock, starring Julian Sands and Laurie Singer. Many of Vidmark's recent tapes have had the promotional trailer for this film on them. I even saw this trailer theatrically, and the film never made it to New York theaters. This is another of the let's go directly to videotape movies I keep complaining about. This tape tells the story of a man branded as a witch in 1691 who doesn't die but comes forward 300 years to wreak havoc on L.A. I think the new Dark Shadows television series handles this better. This tape is priced at $92.95. I doubt you'll see this film in many stores. Speaking of Dark Shadows, towards the end of the month, volumes 65 through 68 of the old series should be hitting the racks. Still affordably priced at $79.80 for 4 tapes, MPI looks to be keeping its word about releasing the entire series on videotape. Collecting this set will be a bit on the expensive side, but most video fans don't mind spending what amounts to be $19.95 per tape per week to get this series. I'd like to see MPI release all 1,225 episodes, but I'd love to see the collector's video racks, as this will take up 245 videotapes. Stephen King fans, rejoice! Graveyard Shift is coming to tape on May 2nd. Priced at $92.95, it reminds me of King's novels in hardcover. Very good value, but still pricey. Beta people, rejoice even more. For you folks, this tape will be $29.95. I wonder when VHS people will get tired of subsidizing the beta market. My favorite god-awful title of the month, Blood-Sucking Pharaohs in Pittsburgh. Priced at a mere $79.95, this tape is the latest entry into the horror comedy genre. I didn't know there was such a thing myself. At a length of 89 minutes, I get the feeling we're paying for this turkey by the minute. What's worse, there's nobody worth watching in this movie at all. Just the type of mindless madness that for that night when there's nothing to do but pop some popcorn. Beta people, by the way, can buy lots of popcorn with the money that they've saved buying this tape at $29.95. Coming May 2nd. For those of you looking for some inexpensive gifts to give your favorite video fan, we have the MGM Reach for the Stars promotion. Listing some 100 tapes sold to dealers at a lower than ever discount. You can expect quite a few stores to stock up on these tapes for discount sales. Tapes available include 2001, 2010, Forbidden Planet, the first Child's Play movie, and all the James Bond films, along with all of the Marx Brothers films that MGM owns. Many more classic science fiction fantasy titles, and even some really nice titles. This is a chance to fill in your video library with some of those tapes you may have been putting off. For those of you looking for a bottom-of-the-barrel price tapes, we have the news that everyone has been waiting for. Star Trek V has been released at the sell-through price of $14.95. For those of you who waited patiently for this tape to drop in price from $92.95, you have been rewarded. For those of you who think this film is still a turkey at any price, I can't help you. Last but by no means least, we have Club Extinction, another unknown film that seems to have a good cast going for it. I always wondered whatever happened to Jennifer Beals. Now I know. Along with Andrew McCarthy and Alan Bates, we're taken to a future Sock City terrorized by an epidemic of bizarre deaths. Don't look at me, I can't write ad copy this bad. The box art is nice, though. Coming April 4th at $89.95 in Hi-Fi Stereo. I'm a Man in Black, and this has been the latest video report.
Don't forget that everything the Man in Black mentions can be found at Omega Zone and other area specialty stores. And now here with his comic book chat is the DeCandido boy. Take it away, DeCandido boy.
Thank you, Lipinski girl. The big news this week on Comic Art Commentary is that First Publishing has announced that they will be dropping all of their regular comic series with 2 exceptions. They are now focusing entirely upon trade paperbacks, graphic novels, stuff like that. The only series that are remaining are their revivification of Classics Illustrated, into which they've sunk large quantities of PR and money, and their popular Japanese import Lone Wolf and Cub. Those are their 2 biggest sellers. This has been coming for a while. They've been cutting back on their series for the last couple of years. The biggest sign that this was starting was when they changed their name from First Comics to First Publishing. No news on whether any of the titles will be revived with other publishers, although it's not likely since First owned most of them. This week's comic in review is Megaton Man by Don Simpson, published by Kitchen Sink Press. This is a accumulation of the first 4 issues of Simpson's famous parody. It originally came out in 1984, which was about the same time as Valentino came out with his series called Normal Man, which does much the same thing. They both lampoon mainstream comics. There are 2 things that are necessary for this kind of parody to work. It has to mimic the original, and it has to be funny. Simpson is very good at mimicking the Jack Kirby Stan Lee Marvels of the 1960s and Megaton Man, but I personally found Normal Man a lot funnier. However, this could be because I read it first. A colleague of mine who'd never read Normal Man thought Megaton Man was hilarious. There are similarities between the 2. They both have a brainless, all-powerful superhero, Captain Everything in Normal Man and the title character in Megaton Man. And they both have parodies of the Fantastic Four and Nick Fury. Normal Man does a better Nick Fury, Megaton Man does a better Fantastic Four. Whatever. Simpson's parody of Spider-Man is hilarious. The scenes at the ivy-covered halls of higher learning in Ann Arbor, Michigan are inspired, and all the names are pretty good, especially Megaton Man's not-so-secret-as-he-thinks identity, Trent Flug. The Doonesbury satire that's sort of running throughout the series is not only ill-conceived, it isn't particularly funny. And Megaton Man's origin is completely mishandled. Simpson puts in Superman's origin, Spider-Man's origin, the Fantastic Four's, Captain America's, and Mowgli's from the Jungle Book all piled on top of each other. The effect is overkill. It doesn't work. Megaton Man does have some hilarious moments, and it's certainly a deserving target, and I especially recommend it to people who have not read Normal Man. Megaton Man is published by Kitchen Sink Press, 136 pages, $13.95 in paperback, $25 for a hardcover that is signed by Don Simpson. In closing for this week, last week I mentioned Misfit Lit, an exhibit that is curated by Gary Groth and Kim Thompson of Fantagraphics Books. A well-placed source in Fantagraphics has told me that Gary and Kim are considering having the exhibit travel after it closes in Seattle in May. I'll keep you posted. And that's all I have to say about that for this week. I will see you next week. Back to you, Lipinski girl.
Thank you, dear.
You're welcome.
This week's memorable moment has been sent to us by Laura O'Keefe, who writes, Dear Chronic Rift, for a memorable moment, I would like to nominate a scene from one of your own episodes, the live coverage of the Creation Convention, in which young Mr. DeCandido earnestly tries not to look at the chest of Vampirella.
Wait a minute.
Which she is equally earnestly displaying. Thank you.
Wait, I don't believe this. John told me it was going to be a clip from a horror movie.
And for your kindness, Laura, in writing to us, we have for you, we have The Warlock Rock by Christopher Stasheff. The Stones in concert, they rock, they roll, they're after your soul.
I'm after somebody's soul, too.
And Robert Heinlein's Grumbles from the Grave.
John's going to grumble when I put him in his grave.
So, Laura, you get something deep, and you get something that's not so deep. Free books, your name on television, what more could you want? So write to us here at The Rift with your memorable moment.
Fit. Famous monsters. He was the creator of Famous Monsters and the creator of Vampirella. What exactly are you doing here with Mark?
also the fact that I did a quick trip down to the planet Dracula. I'm here to promote Spark's new video, Famous Monster. It's a video about the creation of the magazine over the years, all the different movies that he's been creating, and actually appeared in cameos in many of them. Yeah, the different monsters.
Going around to conventions, doing your circuit.
The video shows his mansion. It's a very famous mansion in Harwood called the Acker Mansion, and it just has.
In Ursula Le Guin's long writing career, the themes have remained strong and clear. The elegant magic that is made from family connections, the richness of sexual and political roles that both men and women may play, and the enormous variety of ways that people can be human. She writes, as the New York Times once said, with a rare and sinewy grace. The power of her prose makes her one of those crossover writers for whom the descriptive term SF writer does not prevent from having a much wider audience. Le Guin's parents were famous anthropologists, and the keen sense of culture and of the differences among cultures and the differences between men and women have been keynotes to her work, from the androgynous race in The Left Hand of Darkness to the pure socialist race of The Dispossessed. Her most recent work is Tehanu, which was nominated for both a Roundtable Award and a Nebula Award. It is the adult culmination of the Wizard of Earthsea trilogy. The first book, A Wizard of Earthsea, is the story of a wizard in a terrible adolescence. The Tombs of Atuan follows that wizard, Ged, as he rescues Tanar in a myth of sexuality and terror. The Farthest Shore faces resolution and death in exquisite prose and manageable visions. And finally, Tehanu takes the story of Ged and Tanar into middle age and asks some very piercing feminist questions. With me and Andrea to discuss the worlds of Ursula Le Guin are, on my left, Jim Frenkel, an editor, packager, and consultant who last was on our show discussing women in fantasy and science fiction a ways back. On the other side of Andrea, we have Don Keller, who's been both critic and editor in the field for about 20 years, mostly in the fantasy genre. And all the way on the right is P.M. Griffin, author of the Star Commando series and co-author with Andre Norton of the recent book Storms of Victory. Jim, what is it about Le Guin that makes her such an important figure in the field?
Well, Ursula Le Guin really has a unique position in science fiction. Before Ursula Le Guin, there hadn't been anyone who combined her writing ability, her storytelling power, her authoritative position as an anthropologist, and her feminist vision. She really became the embodiment of a coalescence of a movement. Before Ursula K. Le Guin, women who wanted to write science fiction thought they either had to change their name, write with initials like C.L. Moore, or a male pseudonym like Andre Norton did for years. Everyone knows that Andre Norton's a woman now, but at first people thought this must be some French guy. Or she wrote as Andrew North sometimes. But with Ursula K. Le Guin, all of a sudden, young women, girls who were reading science fiction, who perhaps had been borrowing their older brothers' magazines or, reading it without their parents, knowing they were reading science fiction, that horrible stuff, were able to think of themselves as writing science fiction. And she became a role model for writers like Joan Vinge, Vonda McIntyre, C.J. Cherry, and a whole host of younger writers, P.M. Griffin included. And so she really was a watershed writer. She changed everything.
To pick up on that, since, how do you see yourself at all, Pauline, as a spiritual descendant of Ursula Le Guin, or at least as having been influenced by what she's done?
Well, I started reading Ursula Le Guin's books a little later. I'm more a spiritual descendant of Andre Norton.
All right.
I think Le Guin's books opened up other fields for me. As you mentioned, the anthropological more than anything. We were discussing this topic a little earlier, and I mentioned that the second book of Earthsea, the Tombs of Atuan, I was so fascinated by Tanar's training, the life she led, the way it was handled, not as, ooh, look at this strange society, but actually taking us into it, that I was disappointed when Ged arrived to do the rescue and to change everything.
Well, speaking of the Earthsea books, Tehanu came out many years after the last book, after the third book in the Earthsea trilogy, and yet it picks right up from where it left off. Don, do you think it really fits in with the other three books at all?
It does and it doesn't. It's certainly written by the same writer. I mean, the gracefulness of the prose and the portrait of the land is very much the same, but it's more written from. We've had an ongoing discussion of Tehanu in the New York Review of Science Fiction recently,
Yes.
and the general consensus seems to be that Le Guin took a lot of criticism from feminists over the patriarchal vision in the earlier trilogy, and she felt like she had to redress this when she wrote Tehanu, and as a result, there are many people who feel that they really don't go together quite as well.
Has Tehanu gone too far in the other direction, you think? I mean, going too far towards being feminist?
It's possible.
Well, I think one of the things it does is it raises questions that were sort of hovering in the background of the first three books, but she never addressed or perhaps didn't realize were there. I remember an essay she wrote in Dancing on the Edge of the World that she published in that, where she had taken an essay she had written about the left hand of darkness and made changes to it on how her attitudes had changed about certain aspects of the book, especially feminist aspects of the book, how she had felt different about it. So it's funny, you know, you say it's the same writer, and yet in some ways it isn't the same writer. She's a different person. The person who wrote Tehanu is not the same person who 20 years ago wrote, or was it Earthsea either?
It's a good question as to whether she was affected by the criticism or whether it was just a reflection of her own life experience and having gone through so much more of her career path and having been such a famous science fiction writer for all these years, in between writing the first three books of, is it really still a trilogy?
Yeah, right.
and now,
what do you call it?
and now
Tetralogy.
writing, yeah, right, and now, or a cycle, and now writing that fourth book. I don't know.
Unfortunately, my feeling about the fourth book, it did address many topics, feminist topics, but although she portrayed the women more than she's ever portrayed any female, except Tanar in the first book, in the second rather, the glory isn't there, the magic, the wonder. She does it, she strips the fourth book of that. Like even when Ged failed, when he was weak, when he was human, there was the wonder, there was the magic. That magic was not there. It was not as special in the fourth book at all.
Yeah, that's one thing at the introduction I said it was the adult culmination. In many ways, it could be seen as sort of a maturing in that sense, in that the magic is sort of the wonder, the innocence, you know, of a children's book, or at least of a young adult book. And now the books have grown up, you know, Ged has grown up in a sense, because he's been stripped of his magic in the story.
Well, I don't know.
I don't know if that's good or bad necessarily, but...
Well, magic, and that kind of magic was part of Earthsea as the society, as the world she built. And by lifting it, or altering it in the sense that she did, I think it weakened the end. I mean, the book is beautifully constructed. The characters are finely drawn. But to me, I would rather have had it not being Earthsea. I would rather have had it done like in a world just a little bit apart from there, because to my mind, it's not Earthsea. It's a denial of Earthsea to an extent.
Also, what I understood was that while the fourth book answered some questions that had been left hanging, it also leaves several things hanging. It doesn't really seem to conclude it, even though it's supposed to be the last book. Do you want to?
Yeah, there's the whole thing at the end with Theru. You know, it's like, what happens to her? You know, that's all left open.
The question is, has she succumbed to Herbert's disease? Frank Herbert, of course,
Yeah, right.
who kept on writing Dune books against his will at first. But, well, you know, when a publisher says, we'll pay you X dollars for a book, or X times $10 for this book, you think about it, I would suspect.
Generally one takes X
many
times 10.
writers do, you know, and contrary to popular belief, you know, just because an author is famous doesn't mean he or she is rich. So, you know.
But do you think that because she left things hanging at the end of the last book, that she should write another book to follow it up to answer those questions, or do you think that she will?
I don't know. I think lots of times, well, I think especially someone like Ursula Le Guin could actually have in mind to leave those questions unanswered, because she's someone who I think has a great deal of integrity and will not, you know, won't write a book just because there's money there. but would rather leave it in a more realistic way. In life, things don't get wrapped up with neat little ribbons on them, you know, and I think that a lot of writers who are mature in their vision choose to do this, to leave things deliberately, not quite completely with all the questions answered.
There you go.
Pauline, I wanted to ask you about Always Coming Home. You've read it. Does the music tape that comes along with the book, do you think that helps? Does it add to the spirit?
Oh boy, did you hit me with one. I read the paperback.
Oh, no, you didn't hear the music.
No, however, I imagine that the music would, because that book, I mean, it's called a novel, I suppose, because it's a fiction. But what it is fictionalized anthropology. The story is the story of the people, the valley, the society. Right. The music she dictates, she writes the notes, she describes the instruments, she describes the ceremonies where they were used. And if I were reading the so-called appendices describing the ceremonies, their nature, the music certainly would be nice to have to go along with it and helpful.
Right. Don, I know you've heard the music for this.
Yes.
Can you tell us how it either contributes or detracts?
In comparison.
In comparison.
It's what it is a very clever fake field recording. She worked with a musician who built some of the instruments, and it has instrumental music, it has recitations, it has songs, and it does add an extra dimension because some of the lyrics that are actually in the book are sung in the language of the people on the tape. Right. And so it does definitely add an extra dimension to what is a very an immersion experience anyway, just from the text point of view.
Right. So you listen to it simultaneously as you're doing it?
I didn't actually do that, but still,
it says on the cover copy that you're supposed to do that.
No, what I'm wondering is if you don't listen to it simultaneously, the problem is if you read it first, got your own ideas, and then listened to it afterwards and said, oh, that wasn't what I had in my head. Since you didn't do the two simultaneously, did it sound strange to you? Or
no, it seemed to work just well together because it was so carefully done, and it was done so much in sync with the text.
Right.
That's a hallmark of her work, really. She always creates everything so thoroughly.
Organically.
Yeah. You know, like in The Left Hand of Darkness, the whole world she created there were people who were genderless except for at a certain time, their time of the month, when they had a gender. And, you know, she created a whole language for that.
Right. Well, I think that the key here is, as other people have said, anthropology. You know, she's immersed in anthropology. She grew up with anthropologists for parents. You know, and that's really what her biggest contribution to science fiction is, legitimizing the whole fact that if you're going to create worlds and set the action of a book in a particular world, what better to do than to create that world from top to bottom? You know, before she did it, no one had ever really gone to the great lengths that she's taken, and other writers who are anthropologically trained or not aspire to. Well, I mean, some are and some aren't. I don't think C.J. Cherryh is formally trained as an anthropologist, but she does a very good job. Joan Vinge is an anthropologist. She does an excellent job too. And there are others, of course, but it's called world building. You know, it's become a word that describes something that science fiction writers do. Not all of them do, but the ones who do it, their work is much richer for it, I think.
It gives it an actual background. It gives you
texture.
Yeah.
Like real society, not just, you know...
And it isn't something that you only can understand it as it relates to our own society, which is the way a lot of science fiction writers try to do that. You know, C.J. Cherryh especially, because she'll do her books from the point of view of the alien. You know, the human is the outsider.
And don't forget with the music, if it doesn't fit your mental image of what you've built up, well, a real anthropologist would play you music that one of the American Indian tribes would play, or an Australian Aboriginal people. And you'd say, but that doesn't fit my image. Yeah. So what? This is the music.
Right.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, if anybody has a claim to saying that this is what the music is supposed to be, it would be the person who had created it or the person who had studied it. So
this is how thorough and how good her world building is, that you can say that.
No, I remember when I was much younger, one of the first thing I ever read by Le Guin was The Wizard of Earthsea. right on the first page, you have these maps. So you get to flip through. Oh, we're up to here now, and you get to see your right, and you get to watch your, follow along with the islands. I mean, that always helped me just as a visual reference, and it made things much more believable. It seemed to ground it.
You get to watch Ged sail, follow where Ged and everybody is sailing down the river. It's lots of fun to read. But I think we have to kill it.
Do we?
Do we?
Okay.
Yes, we do.
Okay.
We must cut this all off. But this has been very good. Thank you all for coming here and being patient and doing this discussion. What are we doing next week? Next week we are doing
Japanese animation.
Yes, we're doing Japanese animation. You're having genuine Japanese animation people, people who actually know a great deal about the subject.
Or people who are just into it.
Right, like usual, and
who will teach us enormously.
Teach us greatly. You will learn, you will laugh, you will cry, you will have a wonderful time.
So we can learn and compare and talk about different kinds of animation too?
Yeah. Okay. We will see you then. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Everything.
This episode was sponsored in part by Comics Interview, the magazine where both the fans and the pros turn to see who's who and how it's done. For a free sample copy or special discount on any Comics Interview publication, write to Comics Interview, 234 5th Avenue, Suite 301, New York, New York, 10001. Omega Zone, a store specializing in comic books and video movie rentals, located at 46 8th Avenue between West 4th and Horatio in Manhattan. Telephone, 212-645-6941. Icon 10, the East Coast's largest convention of science fiction, fact, and fantasy, to be held April 19th through the 21st at the State University of New York at Stony Brook on Long Island. Meet actors from Star Trek and Doctor Who, Dean Stockwell from Quantum Leap, astronaut Deke Slayton, authors Harlan Ellison and Dan Simmons, and nearly 200 other fascinating guests. For more information, call 516-632-6460 or 6472. Bain Books, publishers of Larry Niven's Man Kazin Wars, Lois McMaster Bujold, Elizabeth Moon and Anne McCaffrey, Jerry Purnell and S.M. Sterling, and other writers of quality fun science fiction. Angels Down, Fans to the Rescue, Fallen to Angels by Larry Niven, Jerry Purnell and Michael Flynn. A new best-selling SF adventure from Bain Books, coming to a bookstore near you in July.